Hi, everyone. My name is Dwayne Gathers, and welcome to CivitasLA, featuring diverse and emerging leaders who make up this dynamic region and are creating community every day and building a better tomorrow. These bi-weekly conversations enable us to hear from, learn from, and be inspired by a diverse cross-section of civic entrepreneurs and leaders who are forging a path forward in making our region a stronger, more resilient, and connected group of citizens. Our mission is simple. We aim to elevate civic discourse, foster community connections, and promote civic knowledge and engagement across our region while elevating diverse and emerging voices in that conversation. In a blog post that we referenced last year from the nonpartisan civic engagement group called Nonprofit Vote out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, they stated, encouraging people to vote is one of the most direct ways to protect and promote democracy, but running for office is probably the boldest. And certainly for the city of Los Angeles, 2022 is a critically important year, with Angelenos being asked to decide who will lead this diverse and dynamic community over the next 4 years, perhaps 8 years. So as a podcast focused on elevating civic knowledge and engagement, with a hope that these conversations will inspire folks to get involved, CivitasLA is delighted to present this series entitled Leading LA, A Conversation With, as we hear from those candidates making that bold step and seeking to lead this city as our next mayor. We are excited by this opportunity to play a small role in engaging in our communities in this great civic conversation. So today, we are honored to have in studio Leading LA, a conversation with Los Angeles City Attorney Mike Feuer. Mr. City Attorney, welcome to CivitasLA.
Oh, Dwayne, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for the service you perform.
Well, we appreciate you being here. You know, Mr. City Attorney, on CivitasLA, we always appreciate it if our guests would offer a brief personal intro. Where were you born, raised, educated? How long have you been in Los Angeles? How'd your family get here?
Sure. So I was born and raised in San Bernardino.
Okay.
My father was a public school educator there, and I found, growing up in San Bernardino was a very different experience than it is to live in Los Angeles. San Bernardino, as you know, has had a number of challenges over the years. The community economically really struggled, and it gave me, as a kid, a real grounding in real life for folks, because most of my friends in school throughout the course of my career came from, I have friends from very diverse backgrounds. When I was in junior high school in San Bernardino, the federal court judge in Los Angeles, who was first desegregating LA schools, also ordered the desegregation of San Bernardino's schools.
Interesting.
And there was, in my middle school, a lot of tension among the kids, a lot of violence among the kids when that was happening. And one of the lessons of my upbringing in San Bernardino was I became a leader in trying to bring people together, even as a student, because I just couldn't stand the idea that we should be divided from each other by race or by class, for that matter. Another experience for me in San Bernardino that was very formative is my family's Jewish. And I grew up in a city where very few people were Jewish. When I was in maybe third grade, the teacher turned to the class, and the Six-Day War had just broken out in the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
And the teacher turned to the class and said, "Mike, would you please explain the Jewish perspective on the Six-Day War to the class?"
Okay.
Because I was the person in the class who could have done that, right? I was like 8 or something. And, of course, I actually did do that.
Okay.
But that was also part of my upbringing, though, what it felt like to be the other in the community. And there were lots of subtle and not so subtle ways in which it was made clear to me that I was different from my friends. And so lots of different experiences being a kid in San Bernardino. And then I went to college for 2 years in Claremont, and then I transferred to college at Harvard. I worked my way through college and law school there.
And we're not going to hold that against you.
I understand.
Okay.
It was interesting because in my family, no one had ever imagined the possibility of going to a school like Harvard. And it was very challenging for me. I had to, I had scholarships and loans, and I worked my way through school. And I may have had friends who were much more affluent than I was, but it was a real revelation to me to be in Boston. I was a big brother to a young boy who's had a very difficult childhood. I was able to work as a college student with the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau in neighborhoods that were underserved, trying to help people. I never would have had those opportunities otherwise.
Right.
And I was fortunate to go to law school there as well. I was the co-chair of a group that did free legal work for tenants who were being unfairly displaced from their homes, and was an advisor to other students. And it was just generally for me an extremely significant part of my life because I was challenged in ways I had never been challenged before, in a community that gave me a real opportunity to feel what it's like to serve other folks, even as a student. So, and then I was selected to be a clerk on the California Supreme Court. I came back to California, and I've been in Los Angeles since 1984.
Wow. Well, since you've been here that long, you're going to appreciate the lightning round. This is going to be easy for you.
Let's do it.
This is a way for us to get to know our guests through the lens of their Los Angeles, but it's also a great way for listeners who are not from the greater LA area, when they're here, for example, for the Super Bowl weekend, to find out some of our civic leaders' hotspots. Are you ready?
Yep.
Give us a favorite restaurant or two. Where do the Feuers hang out?
Well, can I tell you one favorite restaurant of ours that doesn't exist anymore was the Gardens of Tosco, which was a wonderful Mexican restaurant.
Where is that?
It was on Harper and Santa Monica, essentially.
Okay.
Been for years and years, but doesn't exist anymore. Lots of different places. I'm a fan of mom and pop restaurants around town. There's a place called EK Valley that serves Oaxacan food that we like. There are a number of Thai and Japanese and other ethnic restaurants where we hang out. There's as people know, the very famous Oaxacan restaurant that's in Koreatown called the Galigetsa, where we've gone before. There's a place called the Bowery Bungalow in Silver Lake, which we've enjoyed. A number of restaurants around town. But mostly the places that we tend to go are often way off the beaten track. But I will say restaurants. Shamshari is a favorite restaurant of ours. It's Persian food. All kinds of different places.
So these wouldn't be the happening spots that you see in the LA Magazine
I
list.
tend not to be an LA Magazine restaurant eating kind of guy. But because and seriously, I'm actually much more comfortable in that restaurant where one of the family members runs the restaurant, the other person is in the kitchen cooking. That's my favorite style of place. And I know that's harder and harder for restaurateurs to succeed who have that kind of business model. Costs are escalating for food, and it costs a lot to employ people right now. Rents are high. And that's one of the things that makes Los Angeles such a vibrant and eclectic place is that diversity of restaurants, and I want that culture to hang on. As mayor, I want to be very focused on that.
Well, I'm not going to jump ahead, but you are previewing our Dine LA Week episode with 3 restaurateurs from Venice, Highland Park, and Larchmont, actually, on that very subject. So that's outstanding. Give us a favorite place to take a sip. Where do you go for a coffee, a cocktail, tea?
Well, that's interesting because for what it's worth, I tend not to I don't drink coffee, I drink tea. And I drink a lot of it at work or at home. And so I don't usually hang out and have a cup of tea. I might have a glass of wine at a restaurant, but I'm not so much of a guy who goes to a bar for a glass of wine. I'm more of a guy who might go to a restaurant and have a glass of wine with dinner.
Gotcha.
So I'm gonna have to punt on that one.
You're going to pass on that one. Okay. Give us a favorite place to take a visitor.
Oh, so many. So I like the outdoors here a lot. So I might take a visitor to take a bike on the Marvin Browdy bike path on the beach, or to Playa del Rey to go. There's a bike path that goes from there to Marina del Rey in one direction and south to the South Bay cities like Manhattan Beach on the other. I might take a visitor to hike. either in Griffith Park or Fryman Canyon or Coldwater Canyon or up the coast a little bit in Malibu Canyon or Topanga. I like to introduce folks from out of town to the diversity of the city. There are a few places where you can do that in a more efficient way than going toward Union Station. You have Chinatown on one side and a little Tokyo on the other side, and Olvera Street right next door, and you're not very far away from Boyle Heights and El Sereno and places like that. So those are among the places that I like to take visitors who sometimes, the thing is, people often think of Los Angeles, I think, just in terms of the beach or an amusement park or something. But there's a lot of other stuff going on here in Los Angeles that's really important. I like going on walks a lot, walking through downtown, walking around Leimert Park, walking around the Fairfax neighborhood, walking around Westwood, going through Sherman Oaks and Studio City on Ventura Boulevard. Lots of different places to go.
Well, you've already shared with us a few answers to this next question, which is open space is so important to all of us here in Los Angeles. So we always like knowing about a favorite hike or a favorite park. Yeah.
So if I want an easy to access, doesn't take too long to get there location, Fryman Canyon is a good example. Walking from up there from Laurel, or you can go in from the Coldwater side and go by the Tree People Park in that area. Those are easy places to get to. Multiple hikes in Griffith Park. I like going up the coast a little bit. There is a park in Topanga Canyon up the hill that has a beautiful viewscape of the city of the ocean from there. Farther up the coast, Malibu Canyon is a nice place to take a hike. Lots of different opportunities here.
Give us a favorite community event or activity. We're so excited that we hope that we're on the back end of Omicron and COVID, and we can start getting back out and about again. And we've had a number of guests talk about community festivals taking place in June. So we're excited about that. So share with us, for you, a favorite community event or activity.
Yeah. First of all, an event that comes once a year is an opportunity, but there are farmers markets, for example, around the city, which offer a lovely opportunity to interact with people and spend time, have a little bit to eat, and get fresh fruits and so forth, from vegetables. So I like farmers markets and those activities, but I also love the various annual celebrations we have. The Chinese New Year in Chinatown is always very exciting. I'm always in the MLK parade, and that's a marvelous opportunity to experience the African American community. Cinco de Mayo and a variety of events in the downtown area always are very interesting to do. I also really like, festivals that many of our listeners might not think about, like Nowruz, which is the Persian New Year, celebrated by events on Westwood Boulevard between Santa Monica and Wilshire, in the little Persia community there. Lots of different, these are all interesting events.
That's great. Well, there's so much to do here, and it really is a joy to hear our CivitasLA favorites. So, as a podcast focused on elevating civic knowledge and engagement, that's been our core mission from the beginning. Share with us to begin with, what does civic engagement mean to you?
So, it's interesting because obviously in my professional life, civic engagement means serving others through elected office, and I've had that opportunity. Before I was in elected office, I was the director of BetCedec Legal Services that does free legal work for elderly and disabled people, Holocaust survivors, folks losing their houses or their health care, and they had no money, but they were desperately trying to save the most important thing in their life, and they turned to us. When I ran BetCedec, we had 50,000 clients there. And that, to me, is a form of very meaningful civic engagement. Civic engagement can also mean volunteering. And I think that we have, really in Los Angeles, we have a lot of untapped potential for volunteering here. And I'll mention a couple examples of volunteer activities that I've been involved with, but I also want to talk about some things that could happen that haven't yet begun. Since my days running BetCedec, I have on Thanksgiving with my son delivered home-delivered meals on Thanksgiving to people through Jewish Family Service who have nothing and can't get out of the house. And those interactions tend often to be more than just dropping off a meal. There's interaction with people who often are very isolated and alone. There are many more similar opportunities in the city where I think that one wants to fulfill a sense of purpose. In my own office, as a city attorney, I started a program called Neighborhood Justice, where we take nonviolent first-time offenders and we say, if you take responsibility for what you did for this low-level crime and finish neighborhood justice, we won't prosecute you. We recruit volunteers from a couple hundred people more around the city. We train them in principles of restorative justice. Then these volunteers serve in panels of 3. A person who committed the offense comes in. Those panelists listen and engage with the person. Why did you do what you did? And then a very serious conversation happens because the volunteers say, look, we live in the neighborhood where this offense occurred, and our community was diminished by what you did, not just an individual victim. So we're going to prescribe an obligation for you to perform. It might be tutoring kids or fixing vandalized property and so forth, and an intervention like job training to get you to change the course of your life. I mention that in a little bit of detail because 2 of our volunteers independently wrote opinion pieces for the Los Angeles Times describing how meaningful it was for them. And I want to, Dwayne, turn to this phrase. People have a sense of purpose in life. And sometimes that sense of purpose is detached from what they do day to day for a living. And they're looking for ways to express a connection to somebody else in some manner where they can feel, but for me, the world wouldn't have been as good as this. But because I did this, it matters a lot. And as mayor, I want to make a very focused effort on that. I had the opportunity to assist a person who was experiencing homelessness on my street. And I explained what had happened to my wife, and she said, well, what if everybody did that? And so I'm thinking we should have a just one person campaign. And as mayor, here's what I have in mind. Sometimes our problems seem so big and so intractable that we are paralyzed into inaction. But what if we said, hey, just help one person this year? A senior who's isolated and alone, a young child who might come from a family where they don't have some advantages and they need to have some tutors, some mentorship. Maybe it's a kid in school who needs tutoring. Maybe it's a person experiencing homelessness or someone who needs a job. What if we helped just one person? And imagine we have 4 million people. What if 10% of our city, 1 in 10 people, helped just one person? It'd be transformative, right?
Well, that's amazing you said that because that has been a recurring theme. And I specifically think back to our episode 37 where we talked with Community Spotlight Venice. And of course, obviously, you can't have a conversation around Venice without the conversation around homelessness. But, one of the participants in that discussion talked about the intractability of the issues, and sometimes it's beyond the scope of an individual citizen to get involved. So where do I begin? So that's a great conversation piece there. But, over the course of the past year and a half or so, we've had this wide range of conversation with men and women who are building community in so many different ways and, servant leaders at the community level. But you touched on your role as an elected leader. So thinking about community and civic engagement and leadership, what inspired and motivated you to go from being a community activist and involved to the elected arena? You've been in elected roles for a long time.
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, I want to go back to when I was a kid and then move forward to the time when I decided to run for office. So when I grew up in San Bernardino, I had a talk with my dad. I was pitching to him one weekend. I was an athlete. I loved to pitch to my father when he had time. And I asked him why he chose his job. My father was a public school educator for 60 years. You would have loved my dad. He passed away 6 years ago, a remarkable guy. And my dad told me in more detail than he had previously what it was like to be a prisoner of war to the Nazis in World War II. My dad's plane was shot down. He was captured by the Nazis, and it was horrible because we're Jewish. It was horrible to be a Jewish prisoner of war to the Nazis. But at the end of the war, my dad said the Russians were coming to liberate the camp, and my father couldn't walk because he had suffered injuries when he parachuted from the plane, and the Nazis wouldn't give him boots that fit. So he said his buddies offered to carry him on the march. My dad wouldn't burden them that way. He told me to picture a long line of POWs marching across Austria in the snow. And he said I was like a half a mile behind him, holding on to this little cart I made to hold on for stability. He said the guard next to me could have shot me at any time, and no one would have heard the sound. We were so far behind. He did not think he'd live through that. My dad said to me, I chose my job because I decided then to do the most important work in the world. And for my dad, that work was kids, because he'd seen the horrors of what war had done. So he became a public school teacher and then an administrator in schools and a volunteer. I realized later that when he told me that story, he wasn't just answering my question about why he chose his job. He was suggesting to me what I should think about in choosing mine, the most important work in the world.
Okay.
And that's what led me to run BetCetic, that legal aid program I described earlier.
Yep.
But while I was at BetCetic, Dwayne, things were going great. I was there for 8 years. We were helping thousands and thousands of people. We were advocating in Sacramento and in Washington and the city council and so on for changes to law. But there was an opening for the city council seat in which I was working and living. And I decided I enjoyed tremendously the rewards of advocating, but it's different to be the decision maker than it is to urge someone else to make the decision.
Right.
So I thought I would take a shot at it, and I was the underdog of underdogs. I ran against very famous competitors. I quit my job and walked door to door. We had 2 young kids. My wife was an environmental lawyer with very little money in our household. We had a mortgage. It was insane to do that. But in life, you also have to take risks if you're going to try to change the world.
Sure.
And I was very fortunate to win against the odds that election. And as a consequence, I've been in elective office in 3 different positions.
You've had a very successful track record over a lot of years. Over that time, as a community leader and elected official, what were some of the public policy agenda items that have most animated you? Obviously, you have to deal with a lot of issues over the course of that time. But what's most animated you, and what are some of signature achievements that you are most proud of?
Well, I have been people kid me, but I'm a very intense person about my sense of urgency in the world. We have this little tiny moment in time to burn very brightly, right? So there are many things from which to choose in answering your question. On the city council, I'll give you one concrete example that our listeners use all the time. There were like 120 phone numbers that were to connect residents to city departments to get services they needed. It was so frustrating that people would call 911.
Right.
It would slow down response time for a real emergency. So I spearheaded 311. I imagined that one day it would be a great thing to do, and I decided, and I worked tenaciously to make it happen. And it changed the way we deliver services in the city. People take it for granted now, but I'm very proud of that. Gun violence has been a real cause of mine, preventing gun violence. I was at the scene of the North Valley Jewish Community Center shooting as things were going on. I met a family there. It was not in my council district, but I had gone out there because I heard what was happening. Remember, a racist killed a Filipino-American postal worker and then trained his sights on little kids. And I was at the steps of the center and encountered a couple who said, our son, who was 5, the age of my daughter at that point, had just been shot and rushed to the hospital, and would I wait with them to see if he would live through the surgery? And moments like that are really searing moments, right, as we evaluate what's important to us. And I've become one of the leaders in the nation on gun violence before and since that time. I was very proud the Obama White House had me come to speak at the White House to governors and mayors and lawmakers across the nation about how a local official could be really effective given the absence of congressional work.
Sure.
And so I've written a lot of laws and changed a lot of and making a lot of steps to make our community safer. In the legislature, I served in the teeth of the Great Recession. It was a very tough time to govern. But nonetheless, I'm an author of the Homeowners Bill of Rights to address the foreclosure crisis. I worked very closely with then Attorney General Harris. I wrote the law before Obamacare that said if your child has a pre-existing medical condition, the health insurer has to cover your child. Think how desperate it would be if your child couldn't get access to insurance because they had a pre-existing condition of some severity. I've written, as I said, most of the areas, most important gun violence prevention laws, a lot of things. And then as city attorney, I'm really proud of the fact that consumers have been protected because of our work. Remember that huge Wells Fargo scandal?
Right.
It was our lawsuit that broke that open. I've been very active in a whole array of measures to protect, homeless people were getting dumped on Skid Row by medical facilities. We intervened to stop the practice again and again and again. There was all kinds of consumer protection matters I'm very proud of. Women were purchasing prenatal vitamins that had lead in them, and we worked with the company to reformulate their the vitamins so that people would be safer. We're suing right now the major manufacturer and distributor of ghost gun parts and kits. These are the guns that can't be easily traced, that are flowing into our streets, and they're the crime gun of choice for so many criminals right now. So there is a number of achievements from my days at Bethesda, helping senior citizens stay in their apartments, through my work on the city council, my legislative work, and now my leadership as city attorney. I guess it's just like choosing a favorite child in some ways to identify the things I'm most proud of. But I think what I'm most proud of, though, when push comes to shove, is I don't take the world as it is. I'd like to imagine what could be, and then fight like heck to make that real. I think so many politicians do government by press conference, where you make an announcement and then you check off the box. The most important things require tenacious action. If it's hard, it means it matters. The easy stuff anybody can do. And I tend to focus on the things that are tough, that are important, that require rolling up your sleeves and not letting go until it's finished. And so that's me.
And certainly, dealing with the myriad issues that you do work on, and how challenging communities can be with diverse coming at you with diverse interests. How have you worked with diverse communities in addressing common challenges and getting communities on board under your leadership?
Well, it is a huge challenge, especially in a city like Los Angeles, because I do want to say, Dwayne, we purport to be the most diverse city in the world, and we have, we are in a city of so many groups that outside of that nation, we are the city with this location with the second most people, whether it's Iranian Americans or Korean Americans or El Salvadoran Americans. We are a city like that. But we're a very segregated city at the same time. And I think we overlook that. And that's a real issue for us, is to realize the potential of our diversity and not just the superficial elements of it. But in each of my roles, it's been really important to me to do what you said. Ever since I mentioned to you my days in junior high school, actually, how do you find ways to listen authentically to someone else's concerns and to incorporate people from a variety of perspectives into that conversation? So, for example, as city attorney before the pandemic, I've done dozens and dozens of town halls all over Los Angeles. And as you might imagine, people who come aren't narrowly focused on the work of the city attorney. I'm typically the public official in the community. So I get asked about everything from sidewalk repair and tree trimming to how to deal with that gang issue and what about airport noise, whatever it might be. And I never say it's not my job, because I think it's really important for people to know, even if I don't have the authority over that question, I'm going to connect you to someone who does, and we're going to make it happen. So I'm used to that kind of atmosphere. I was just a city council member. I did the same thing, grounded in neighborhood conversations. In the state legislature, even though I was in Sacramento, I would come down to LA and hold those community sessions. It was so interesting. I was talking to a member of Congress the other day about the fact that we know there are many congressional members of Congress who are uptight about being in a room where there is controversy and dissent, and have stopped holding town hall meetings. And look, that comes with the territory. That's just fine with me. The thing that I sometimes find challenging is there's sometimes very raw conversation where people don't want to listen to each other and shout at each other. And I've been in those settings as a public official many times where I do demand one thing, and that is you get to say what you want to say with respect to the other person. Because often they're not yelling at me, they're yelling at somebody else who disagrees with them in the group, right?
Well, it certainly does seem as though those LA City Council meetings have become just these shouting matches. I don't know how you can control that.
Well, I guess what you're referring to, Dwayne, is the preliminary to the council meetings. There's public comment.
The public comment period.
Yes.
And not the council members themselves, but the public comment period. For sure.
And it's a real challenge because everyone has a First Amendment right to say what they mean. What I don't like, and it's very hard to police, is the use of invective. I don't like the use of words that have racist elements to them. And free speech at some point doesn't contemplate taking steps that are just incendiary, that are trying to set somebody off. So it's complicated. And I will say, when I was on the city council, there was a lot of public comment that was very rough and raw and impolite doesn't begin to describe it. It was rude. But it came with the territory.
Yeah.
That it's escalated now, and all the divisions in our society have intensified. I think some of the yelling at each other parts. And one of the keys to being mayor right now is being able to find common ground in the city.
Right. Well, let's transition to that very subject area. First of all, let's talk about voting and voting participation, because as you know, LA has, despite the size of the city, has had notoriously low voter participation, particularly at the municipal level, which really is the level of government that matters most. And efforts have been moved to move the election cycles to increase that. What's been your view on local voter participation? Does it concern you? And what can we do to get more people to participate in that aspect?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah.
When I was in the state legislature a little more than a decade ago, I wrote the law that enables same-day voter registration in California.
Okay.
And I wrote that law precisely because, Dwayne, there were voter suppression efforts across the country. And I wanted California to be both in real life and symbolically the antidote to efforts to suppress voting by saying here, we want to expand voting. And I want to say, a lot of professional politicians were uptight about my law, because if you have people who are registering to vote on election day, for example, and then voting, those folks haven't necessarily gotten the campaign mailer that the candidate paid for, right? The person's more of a wild card. That's okay with me. That's all right. So let's go down to the local government level now, because as you can tell, I'm a big fan of increasing voter involvement. I do want to say, I know that most voters in the city lack faith in civic leadership. It's not new. It's always been so. One thing I'm doing in my campaign for mayor that no candidate has ever done is I'm going to all 101 neighborhoods in Los Angeles. It is a busy time. Let me just put it like that, because I go to a neighborhood and I say, I'm here, ask me anything. And so folks come, no one's buying tickets, they just arrive.
Right.
And I don't have staff to help, filter the questions. Whatever you want to talk about, we're going to talk about, and I'm going to talk with you directly. And I think we need more of that in civic life, more opportunities for voters to be exposed to a candidate without a filter, not to have a campaign that's run on TV, but a campaign that's run in neighborhoods, which has been my focus throughout my career, is uplifting neighborhoods, right? So part of the key, Dwayne, I think, is if you're going to inspire people to vote, they have to feel that they matter and that they count.
And
in this campaign, I've said, I've said in this campaign, we should cut city council districts in half, because the council district I represented as a city council member, same size as Buffalo, New York.
Right.
The whole city. Or Boise, Idaho, the whole city. Right? I'm trying to break down that size, because I think that if people have a more intimate relationship with their representative, they're more likely to be heard. And when they're heard, they'll engage more. When they engage more, they'll vote more. There's momentum that is established, and there's also the opposite of that happens. If people feel detached from their representative, that their voice has no meaning, then they're not going to vote either.
Sure.
And that's corrosive, I think.
So let me ask you, of the 101, what number are you at now?
I haven't counted. I'm probably a little more than halfway through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So somewhere over 50.
Okay.
But
and
what that means is, since I spend somewhere usually between an hour and 2 hours in each neighborhood, we're talking about a lot of conversation.
Sure. That's amazing. That's amazing.
But it's very cool, actually.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's interesting about it is there are people sometimes who come and they want to express disagreement with the position that I've taken. And those are opportunities to listen carefully and then to explain.
Yeah.
And what's been most rewarding is when I find people who, when we have a little dialogue about it, change their minds and become fans. Sometimes the disagreement with me is also disagreement with others in the group.
Sure.
And so I sometimes have to mediate a little bit sometimes when people say, someone's talking and someone tries to shout that person. I say, no, not in my meetings. You listen to each other and do it. But it's very interesting, that I have to say, and I think more opportunities like that fuel engagement.
No, that's great. So voter participation is one element, and certainly an important one, of civic engagement, which we touched on. Another part is volunteerism, and we talked about that briefly. A couple of years ago, the D.C.-based Corporation for National and Community Service found that in their nationwide survey, that L.A. had the lowest number of those surveyed with volunteer hours per resident, and that just under 20% of residents in the L.A. Long Beach area volunteered, ranking L.A. 46th out of 51 regions surveyed. What are your thoughts on those stats? And what are some efforts that you think you might undertake as mayor to spur more civic engagement in our region?
Yes. So we've talked about one of them, which is my vision of a just one person campaign in the city, which would require the city to help make it easier for volunteers to channel their sense of purpose into helping another person through an existing organization or otherwise. I'm a big fan of youth engagement in particular. I think that people get in the habit of being involved on behalf of other people at young ages. Once they get in that habit, they don't break that habit. If they wait until later in life, they rarely get involved. And so I want to get kids involved early on. There are programs like AmeriCorps around the nation, which have a foothold here in Los Angeles, that I want to continue to emphasize. I also want, as mayor, I'll be highlighting a number of philanthropic opportunities in the community, highlighting volunteer organizations that are making a real impact as a way both to inspire people to join those organizations and to challenge others to replicate the best aspects of those programs.
Well, there certainly is no shortage of need in this area, and as I've told clients of mine, we always need more hands on deck. So, Mr. City Attorney, thank you for being here. This has been a great conversation and an honor for CivitasLA to have you with us. We're excited to learn more about you, your civic journey, and explore ways that you hope to spur more civic knowledge and engagement and get more grassroots involvement across our city. As we like to say on CivitasLA, the guest gets the final word. So share with us any concluding thoughts, especially as it relates to how you hope your leadership may make a difference in the lives of our diverse communities over the next 4 or perhaps 8 years.
Well, Dwayne, first of all, I want to thank you. Let's end where we began. This is a public service, and you should be very proud of it. It's a very inspiring series, and you're making a real difference. As for me, I care about 2 things in my life, broadly stated: my family and changing the world. I was in a very serious car accident when I ran for the job I hold now as city attorney. It's usually a fatal accident. And I survived, but I was banged up. The entire left side of me was pretty much crushed. And I had to get back on the campaign trail from the intensive care unit almost immediately. Like within 48 hours, I went from the ICU to campaigning. I was in tremendous pain. But that experience underscored for me how life can turn on a dime. I said earlier that we have to burn very brightly in a very short period of time, and then we're done. That experience underscored how short that time could be. And I think at this moment in the city, when we confront so many crises, not problems, emergencies, homelessness, affordable housing, the pandemic, its health and economic consequences, public safety, the issues that are really roiling our city right now, this is a moment to step in. And I would say to the electorate in the city, the key question is this: which candidate has the proven record of executive leadership here in Los Angeles to hit the ground running and shake up the status quo on that first day in office? And if that's the test at a moment when we have all these crises, then I'm the candidate, because I've had both legislative experience, but the mayor's an executive. And that means setting an agenda, managing, and making sure that sanitation is doing its job on the street, that the fire department is working effectively. Very different skill set than working as a lawmaker, as my opponents have. I've been in that job, but I've been an executive, and I've been very proud in my office. The American Bar Association gave my office the top award in the nation for a public sector law firm. And the LA Times wrote that I set the standard for city attorneys. I want to set the standard for being mayor too, and that's my next adventure.
Outstanding. And are you committed to the mustache?
Well, that's a good question. So yes, for our listeners who don't know this,
which I understand has been with you for decades now. So
yes. So the answer to that is yes. So I've had the mustache since 1977. My wife has never seen me without it. Okay. And I think the idea of not having it would scare her. Okay. There was a time when my daughter said, that mustache is so uncool, it's almost cool again. So, it's been back in fashion. It's been a trusty sidekick of mine. My campaign video has a cute reference to that mustache, and I'm looking forward to being a mayor. I think I'm not sure the city's had a mayor who wears a mustache. Okay. There may be good reasons for that.
There you go.
But so this will be another first for me.
Anything to set you apart from the crowd. That's
You've got
a good thing. Well, this dialogue has been great, and I appreciate your time. We all appreciate your service to our community for sure. For listeners who may want to learn more, we invite you to visit www.mike4la.com. And thank you for joining us, Mr. City Attorney. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed this program, and we hope you'll join us for this ongoing series of conversations around civic engagement with those candidates who hope to lead this community over the next 4 or perhaps 8 years. As we say on CivitasLA, until we meet again, stay strong, and don't forget to get involved. To learn more about CivitasLA and to share feedback on this program or recommend a future program, please visit us at www.civitasla.com. And don't forget to connect with us on Facebook at CivitasLA, on Instagram at Civitas_LA, and on Twitter at Civitas_LA.